Welcome to the third session in our continuing series on the Sacrament of Confession here at Transfiguration as we continue our cell evangelization. It's a pleasure to join all of you again as we look at this important sacrament, and this time from the perspective of the priest. Now, I imagine most of us, when we think of confession, think of it as the penitent's perspective. After all, that's how most people in the church are going to experience this particular sacrament, and indeed, even each priest will experience this sacrament as a penitent. But it is also sometimes useful, I think, for people to know exactly how does the priest himself usually approach or consider this particular sacrament. And I thought I'd share with everybody here my own personal experience and thought of it as a priest hearing confessions. I've said many times over the years that one of the things I enjoy most about being a priest is hearing confessions. As a matter of fact, I remember one time sharing this with some of my family members who no longer practice the faith, and they all chuckled and laughed, saying, "Oh, sure, you love hearing all the different things people are doing." And I said, no, it's not that at all. It's because this is the one time when I know I'm really doing God's work. Along with the Mass, I know that this uniquely priestly identity I have is going to be of service to other people. And the fact is, as a priest hearing confessions, the fact is most confessions are pretty boring. People say the same sins over and over again. And I don't just mean that the individual penitent may be repeating the same confessional sins time and again, but honestly, most people are committing more or less the same sins. It's not all that particularly exciting or interesting to hear a person's sins. But what is interesting is to see how God slowly but surely over time moves a person to a deeper and greater place of holiness, and that through this sacrament he achieves sanctification in the lives of his faithful. That's what's exciting about this, to see the progress people make over time through sheer determination and humility in the sacrament. That's why I consider it one of the greatest blessings, because I know that oftentimes I'm hearing the confessions of people who are far holier than I am, but God has nonetheless asked me to stand in his place and to offer his mercy, his consolation, and his guidance to those faithful people. It's one of the great privileges to hear a person's confession, because it really reminds me that I am supposed to be Jesus Christ to another person. And it's in this sacrament that we most perfectly as priests radiate the love of God. On account of just how important the sacrament of confession is, it's vitally important that every priest takes time to pray and prepare himself before he hears confessions. I make it a point of going into the sacristy for a good solid 5 minutes or maybe even 10 minutes before I come out to hear confessions, so that I have a quiet place where I'm free from any distractions and am able to just simply quiet my soul, clear my mind, and take time to be in the presence of God. A priest who goes to hear confessions without God in his heart is of simply no use to those penitents that he will visit and hear the confessions of that particular day. God must be at the heart of every single priest's work. And as I try to make God the center of the work that I will do in the Sacrament of Confession, I count on two particular saints to help me in this regard. The first is St. John Vianney, the patron saint of all priests. We all know his story. He's an incredible man devoted to his parish, and he would spend even up to 16 hours a day hearing people's confessions. That kind of devotion, that kind of fervor, is something that I hope I can bring as I hear confessions. Because the truth is, at times, it can be challenging to hear confessions. It might be the end of a very long day, and I want to just start to doze off as I sit in a still position and the heat is kicking in. Or it could be simply that I'm bringing a lot of different difficulties from the parish staff or from the life of the faithful or from my own personal experience, and I need to let those things go. St. John Vianney is an inspiration to me that I should be attentive to the needs of the penitent and do my part to help them out. The second saint I count on is St. Alphonsus Liguori, who is the patron saint of confessors. Now, anybody who's ever read his sermons knows that St. Alphonsus Liguori was not a particularly light priest. He was very intense, and he had an exacting nature about him that he expected goodness and perfection from each and every single person. Yet, I find in him a great reminder to me that I must be firm as well as gentle in the sacrament of confession. At times, the priest is called to correct, he is called to chastise, he is called to admonish the sinner. But it should always be for the sake of helping that sinner to become a better person. Thus, I find in St. Alphonsus Liguori a person that can help me to be able to balance the need to be gentle as well as firm with a penitent, so that the grace of conversion can work in that person's soul. It's in this spirit of preparation through intercessionary prayer and relying on God that I can then approach the sacrament. But most important is I really just need to approach it with an empty heart. I have no idea who's going to come in on that particular day. And thus my heart cannot be full of my own anxieties, my own concerns, or the struggles that are going on around me. I have to empty my heart so that the love of Christ can fill it up and I can offer that to the penitent who will be before me. Because on any given day, I might have a very quick rush of confessions, or I might have a very slow pace of confessions. I might have people coming back to the sacrament after being gone for years, or as I like to call them, the frequent flyers. But in each case, I need to try to help that person to experience the love of Christ, not my own baggage, and to let go of who I am so that the person that is before me can be experiencing Jesus Christ himself. That's not to say that the priest shouldn't be aware of his own experiences. He should use them, but not according to his will, but rather according to God's will. The more I hear confessions, the more I actually learn things and understand things, and the more I'm able to maybe take what I've learned through sacramental confession and apply it to the good of another person. But I must never, ever think that it is my job to relay my opinions, my personal pieties, my personal devotions on another person in the sacrament of confession. I am there to offer them this person of Jesus Christ, which is why I make it a point before I hear confessions to slow myself down so that I don't feel like I have to bring everything of me into the sacrament, but can instead help a person to experience who Jesus Christ is. After having prepared myself through a spirit of prayer to go to hear confessions, then the work actually begins of being with the penitent. And in this regard, the key thing for a priest is to know that he is being with an individual person. Let's take an example here. Suppose an 18-year-old comes to me and confesses that he drank too much, and then a 35-year-old comes to me and confesses that he drank too much. The sin is identical, yet the circumstances are very importantly different. An 18-year-old, for example, is drinking underage and thus has committed a civil crime. Meanwhile, a 35-year-old might be negligent to his children because he's become intoxicated, or he may have failed to be available to his wife. There's all kinds of circumstances in each individual person's life, and thus the priest needs to be attentive to those particular things. It's for this reason that a priest might ask people questions to help understand who they are and be able to offer them better advice to them. It's also for this reason why it's good to go to the same priest over and over again. As a priest, I find it very difficult to offer good counsel to somebody who I don't really know. If I'm hearing a person's confession that I've never heard before, I'm not really quite certain what their state of life is. I don't really have a trusting relationship with them yet, and thus it's going to take time for that to be built. That's why I encourage people to come to the same priest. Doesn't matter if it's me, but the same priest as a regular confessor, because over time that priest will really start to know a person's soul and be able to help that person through more specific kinds of advice, as well as perhaps more interesting penances. When I usually give people a penance, it starts out with the simple basic things, 2 Our Fathers, 2 Hail Marys, 3 Our Fathers, something along those lines. But when I've really started to get to know a person, and we've been able to build trust over the course of perhaps even several years, then the penance can take on a more unique way that helps that person really live his or her life more fully. Perhaps that's going to be me taking the time to explain to the person that they should do different kinds of fasts or different kinds of works of mercy, and through that help them to come to a deeper and greater participation in the life of Christ and the graces offered through the sacrament and its absolution. The magnitude of hearing confessions is great, and as a priest does it, he must always remember that he is not doing it as a lone ranger, but instead as a son of the church, which is why each priest needs to be observant to what the church requires of him as he hears confessions. Most notably, this is the sacramental seal, meaning that whatever a priest hears in confession can never be revealed to another person. When a person commits a sin and then entrusts the knowledge of that sin to a priest in confession, that person needs to know that the priest will never violate that confidence. And that's what the sacramental seal does. If a priest does violate it, he actually receives an automatic excommunication. He is losing all of his status as a priest by virtue of breaking that seal. And the seal is so intense that no earthly authority is able to lift it. There's nobody in the church that can lift it for me. There is no civil governing force that can say I have to violate it. Even the penitent, him or herself, cannot release me from the bond of the sacramental seal. This hopefully helps everybody who comes to confession to know that they can entrust their soul to the priest without fear of reprisal. But this also is not the only thing that a priest has to consider as he is hearing confessions. He also has to be aware of what the church thinks of in terms of the nature of a penance. The church understands a penance as medicine, and thus the priest cannot be using it to punish a person, and there are some strict guidelines about how he can assign that penance. First, the priest can never require the penitent to reveal his or her conscience to another person. This kind of flows naturally out of the sacramental seal. I can't, through my penance, kind of find a workaround that requires somebody to reveal what he or she has done. I get often asked, if somebody were to commit murder, would I be able to require them to turn themselves into the police? And the answer is no. I can encourage it. I can say that, yes, a true, proper repentance of it would bring about that surrender to the authorities, but I can't actually make that a requirement as a part of receiving sacramental absolution, because I cannot force a person to violate his or her own conscience and to reveal it to another person outside of the sacrament. Additionally, the church requires that the sacrament and its penance be able to be completed in a real and clear way. I can't give to someone a penance that says, go and be a nice person. How does one know if he or she is being a nice person? What's the measure of it? And when is it enough to be a nice person? The sacramental confession requires the penance to be actually known to be completed. Thus, when I assign a penance, I need to make sure that I'm making it clear what the person needs to do and when they need to do it. Oftentimes, it's something they can do right there in the church. That's why many priests will give prayer as a kind of penance. But certainly, I can say within the next week, you need to call your mother-in-law and wish her well, or something along those lines. The key is that the penance needs to be very direct. And lastly, the church forbids the penance to any way benefit the priest. I can't say to someone as they make their confession, their penance is to bake me a blueberry pie. Under no circumstances can the priest himself profit through a penance. And thus, if the church is requiring this of me, I must oblige in that regard. And if any priest were to violate these rules, the penance would actually not be something that the penitent needs to follow. And in fact, they should report that priest to his bishop so that the bishop can address this problem and make sure that it doesn't happen yet again. As I said at the beginning of this video, it's truly one of my great joys to be able to hear people's confessions. And I know sometimes people feel very nervous about coming to a priest for the sacrament, but I want to assure each and every single person hearing this that the priest is not going to remember your confession. The fact is, I've heard I don't know how many thousands of confessions over the years, and I couldn't tell you right now a single thing about them. Not only just because I'm forbidden it, but the fact that I actually genuinely really never remember what a person says in confession. I think there's a kind of grace God gives to the priest to prevent them from having to carry that burden with them all the rest of their life. That God takes care of his priests and helps them to be available to be his son for another person, so that each of us can experience the healing power of Jesus Christ.